Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Talk Freelance to Me podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Cisneros Mejia, and I'm so thrilled today to introduce to you someone with really a global perspective on journalism and communications, the lovely Priya Joi. Priya, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I am thrilled. Your bio, like I mentioned to you before, was just incredible. Freelance fam, I'm going to read you a little bit from Priya's background so you can get to know her more. Priya Joi is a distinguished science journalist with over 2 decades of experience in the field. Her career has included positions at prestigious organizations such as New Scientist, The Lancet, the World Health Organization, along with consulting roles for groups like UNICEF. Priya's expertise has not only shaped her reporting, but also has made her a vital consultant in the global health arena. In March 2023, Priya made her literary debut with a memoir called Motherland, or Motherland, published by Penguin. The profound work explores themes of motherhood, race, and identity. As an experienced public speaker, Priya has been featured in numerous scientific and journalism conferences and has appeared on many podcasts. She also serves on boards and helps other writers through one-on-one coaching and courses. Priya, you've done so many things. Can you tell me how you initially got into the field of science journalism?
Yeah, so I have always loved science from when I was really young, and it was a no-brainer for me to be involved in science in some way. My undergrad degree was in genetics, and
Mm.
I automatically thought I should do a PhD or I should do a master's. And then I couldn't really settle on anything that I wanted to do. And I did actually start a master's in neuroscience, which I loved as a subject. But I was really hating the whole process. And at one point when I was doing my undergrad, one of my final thesis was on these developmental genes in mice. And it was such an interesting topic, but being in the lab bored me so much because you need a lot of patience to wait for your experiments to run and everything else. And I was just kicking my heels, not knowing what to do. And so I went to University College London, which is where I studied in England. And I was in the genetics lab there. I was just doing a bit of extra work and trying to figure out where to go. And a friend of mine handed me a newspaper because this was quite a long time ago and everything was on newspapers. And it was an advert for a master's in science communication. And she said, this sounds exactly like you. You like talking about science, you love writing, and you love science, but you don't want to be a scientist. And I thought this was perfect. And so I did the course. It was a 1-year master's, and then did a bunch of internships in radio and TV and then writing. And then I dived headfirst into being a science writer and have loved it ever since.
That is so fascinating. I love that. And what a good friend that you had to think of you
Yes.
to pull that out and to see that talent that you had and to share that idea with you because it seems like it set you on this amazing trajectory now that's been very successful. So that's awesome. And I know you're in Barcelona, right? Is that where
Yeah.
you're based now?
Yes. Yeah.
That's so cool for me being in the United States and not really traveling a lot. I see all of the wonderful things that you've done all over the world. I know that you've done stories in Algeria and Cuba and many countries. Can you share maybe an experience about how being in a local area and being influenced by local culture has impacted some of your reporting or one of the many projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, so I think Cuba was very impactful because so by the time I went to Cuba, it was for a global health conference, and I had worked in global health broadly for quite a while. But it's very different when you're sitting in an office in London or Geneva and you're writing about things that happen over there. And I think that's a kind of a sort of hang up of like a colonial way that science is set up anyway. That's often people in quite privileged countries writing about illnesses and diseases and populations that are somewhere far less developed, and that structure still exists. But what happens when scientists or science writers especially stay within those privileged settings, they never get to see how science and health actually impacts people. And so in what I found fascinating in Cuba, this was in 2009, was that there was a huge amount of poverty, there was political issues, but there was a very socialist approach to health and healthcare. And so people actually did have good healthcare, even though they didn't have a lot of money or they weren't earning money. Every country is complex, every government is complex. And that I thought was really fascinating. And it's a rare example of a country that will prioritize health over everything else. And so even people who don't have a lot of money to spend on any extra things in their life, they can still get access to healthcare. And I found that quite profound because most countries, even very wealthy ones, do not prioritize the health of their citizens. So yeah, and it stayed with me for a long time.
Gosh, that's fascinating, especially being here in Florida and our proximity to Cuba, the large heritage. A lot of Cuban Americans live specifically here in Florida. And I think about that, how profound what you're saying, the difference, the juxtaposition, how my state is only 90 miles away and how different, right? How night and day the country that I live in deals with health or doesn't. And then just really off the coast across the water, how different, how those values are different. Very interesting. And so you've done a lot of the reporting, but then you've had all of this consulting work. That's been really interesting. Can you tell me how that happened and maybe a transformative project or initiative that stands out to you?
So when I was consulting for World Health Organization, for example, so I shifted a bit from journalism into consultancy about 15 years ago, I would say, for a bunch of different reasons. As much as I love journalism, to be fueling myself solely on journalism is quite hard work, no matter what publication you're writing for. It's also pretty quick turnaround. So you're constantly having to churn out stories. And it's hard work. I think it's hard work anyway, being a journalist, but it's hard work if you're a freelance journalist because you're having to pitch so many stories to make up a monthly salary, for example. And I wanted a bit more stability, and I was thinking of having a baby. And so I started then trying to do longer pieces of work. I also wanted to work on longer projects. So, for example, working for the UN and then working on maybe a long report that I would work on for 2 or 3 months. And so I put out a bunch of feelers to organizations, to NGOs, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. And I put out feelers to environmental organizations that I was familiar with. And I just tried to pivot a little bit. I didn't want to move away from journalism, but I did want to move into a different type of freelance work. And so I then built up my portfolio from there. And then I started working with the World Health Organization, writing bigger reports, editing reports. Sometimes I would go into their headquarters in Geneva to work for a couple of months, and I built up slowly the amount and the type of work that I was doing. And then I still had time to report on things if I wanted to, but it meant that I had a bit more of a sustainable freelance career.
It's amazing. How inspiring, too, the different ways that you've been able to translate that love of storytelling and questioning, investigating, researching into a new way. That's very inspiring, especially when we consider the landscape of freelance now, some of the challenges that have arisen. So I love that point. And I imagine it's very different to go from being a freelance journalist where you're yourself, you're a one-woman band, and then being kind of implanted or inside of a large, when we're talking about, you mentioned the UN, UNICEF, WHO, these are huge organizations with lots of chefs in the kitchen, with a lot at stake. I'm sure high profile projects that you're doing. Can you talk about some of these maybe challenges that you encountered working in these large organizations and how you overcame them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, yeah, you're right. That was quite a shift, a sort of gear shift in terms of how I worked and how I thought of myself as a writer, because I was still the same person, really. It's just that if you're a freelance writer and you're writing for a publication, usually it's just you and your editor, and that's it. And there may be a couple of other people involved, but it's a very kind of bilateral relationship that you have. Whereas when you work for an organization, you're skating this tricky line between still being a freelancer, but almost getting subsumed as a member of staff, like a temporary member of staff. And that, I think, is a tricky thing, because even if you are treated like a member of staff, you're not, in the sense like you don't have pensions or paid holiday or sick leave or anything like that. And it can be a very difficult thing to navigate, where organizations will treat, often, especially long-term consultants, will treat them like their staff, have the same expectations of working on a project as long as it takes, or as late as you need to, or working on the weekends, but they're not being remunerated in the same way. And that is something that now, when I coach people, it's a point that I really focus on a lot, because many freelancers are in that position where they're on, let's say, a 6-month consultancy, and they get absorbed into the team and everyone else treats them as if they are a member of staff. And it's about then remembering that, as a freelancer, we're our own business. It may be a business of one, but we're still a business. And remembering that we are empowered to make decisions for ourselves and our business. And I think boundaries is really critical there. So, for example, even when I was a consultant, I didn't do this at the beginning because I just didn't have experience of doing it. But after a while, I would push back on these requests to work in the evenings or respond to things on the weekend. And I would, if I got a lot of pushback in the other direction, I would politely remind the person that I'm not a member of staff. And so I work as a consultant, and these are the terms and conditions. And I don't like to pull those things out. This is what I'm contractually obliged to do. But if I have to, I do. Because usually the other people that you're working with are not going to be thinking of your rights as a contractor or a consultant. They just want to get the work done. So I do think that's a space where there are other issues also with being a freelance writer and working with publications, in terms of there's a whole host of things that can happen there. But yeah, working as a consultant, I think, is it can be quite a gray area what you're expected to do. So yeah, boundaries are very important there.
I love that. And I think it resonates a lot with me and other experiences that I've had that have been similar. And for me, I found some of the boundaries that I needed to set most, in which were difficult, were with fellow staff, or not fellow staff. See, there I'm going, I'm playing into that, right? But other coworkers on a project, they're classified as staff, as employees, whereas I've been an independent person. And that can be an awkward, I guess there's a different dynamic when you're setting those boundaries and reminding the supervisor, the manager, the person that hired you, but then other folks that you're working with alongside, they don't they're not privy to maybe the contract that you signed, to the context, to the background, how you were brought in, why you were brought in. And I've had experiences having to navigate that while still wanting and needing to preserve a good working relationship with folks that you have you experienced that? And if so, how have you managed that? Or do you communicate differently with those boundaries with folks you're working with alongside?
Yeah, and I think probably you're right. In some ways, that is a harder line to navigate, because those are probably the people you're working with more on a day-to-day basis. Usually the person who's hired you or supervising you, it's unlikely that you're going to be working with them every single day. It's going to be your peers, and whether those peers are consultants or whether they're staff. Also, it sometimes is the case where other consultants may be happy to work as staff. Maybe they actually want to be staff one day, so they don't care about working on weekends or working at night or whatever it is. But that is not the framework within which we have to work just because someone else does that. Yeah, when I've encountered those things, I politely remind people that I work up to a certain point in the evening, and then I have a daughter. Kids can be great excuses in those situations. I need to be with her, or it's been a while since I've been asked to look at anything over the weekend. But again, I would just politely remind people that these are more or less my working hours, and I can be flexible in the occasional moment, but as a rule, I don't work at these times. And and then it's a question, I guess, of seeing how far that other person or group of people want to push it. And if they do, then I think it can be uncomfortable, but you do then have to say, hey, just to remind you, I'm a consultant. And so these are my ways of work, or this is the context within which I work in this organization. And because it is uncomfortable, and other people can make you feel like you're not really pulling your weight, but you have two very different contracts. So it's not an equivalent thing. And people just need to be reminded of that, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they are employees and they haven't learned about our world, being
Yeah.
running a freelance business, being an independent consultant. A lot of them, it's almost like that there has to be a little bit of education. And maybe that's not our place necessarily to be teaching them that. But I think that I've had experiences where people have gotten mad at me or been
Yeah.
upset, given me silent treatment because after I've had to assert very kindly but firmly. I think there's a lot of feelings when it comes to work. There's a lot of resentment, or there can be. And so I've definitely felt that friction. That's so interesting. I think maybe you should do a whole master class on that, because I think that's really needed. There's a lot of
Yeah.
freelancers who might be looking at short-term contract roles such as what you've done, and maybe this is their first time and they don't know how to navigate that. I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes it might be jealousy, because
Yes.
I do have friends who are friends or people I know, a little bit more acquaintances, who work in staff positions, and they're really envious of freelancers
Mm,
who they, in their mind, I think that we all knock off at 1 o'clock, go and have cocktails. I don't really know what they think like
yeah.
freelance life really is, but there's a perception of so much freedom and flexibility.
Mm,
And that kind of annoys me, because I think probably you could be freelance as well. No one's forcing you necessarily to be staff. It is a choice. But also, I think because I've now been a freelancer for a really long time, the thing I always urge people to remember is no one is going to advocate for you, for your
mm,
needs and you as an individual or you as a business. Especially you as a business, no one is advocating for you. Maybe they're not even doing that when you're in an organization. If you're staff, there are HR departments, but it depends on the organization. I don't always feel that HR departments are as supportive as they could be. They tend to protect the employer more than the employee, right? So this is maybe something everyone needs to think of, is in terms of how do you advocate for yourself while also, as you were saying before, preserving that working relationship. But yeah, especially as freelancers, we are one-man bands, just one-woman bands, just sailing along in our little rafts, and we do have to protect our boundaries.
yes. Even more. Yeah, that's so interesting. Very fascinating. So you spoke about your daughter, you spoke about being a mom. Do you have just one child or do you have more?
I do. I've got one kid, and then I've got two older stepkids, so three
Oh,
and two.
beautiful. Yes, you've got your hands full. I've got three kids too. They're young, they're little. How has being a mother, becoming a parent, influenced your approach to journalism, your approach to these communications consulting opportunities? Because I'm sure companies have tried to recruit you and wanted to have you join the staff. And you mentioned you've done freelance for a long time. Can you talk about that connection?
Yeah, so I think, like a lot of people, when I had my daughter Leela, I immediately wanted to move into a working environment or a way of working where I could spend more time with her,
Mm,
and be able to drop her off at school and to pick her up from school and to be with her on the weekends and to be with her when she comes home from school and all of that. And not just to be with her physically, but to be with her mentally as well,
mm,
because I do think sometimes we create physical time to be with our kids, but if we're then constantly responding to emails or things, we're not there. Like, we're just physically, the shell of our being is there, but
yeah.
our minds aren't there. And kids not only are aware, they're aware of that from quite early on. And now my daughter's old enough, she's nearly 10, where she will articulate that and she'll say, "Hey, mama, no phones right now." And I sometimes, if it's something that really can't wait, I will ask for 2 minutes, and I go, "Okay, can I just have 60 seconds, 100 to reply to this?" And then I go and put my phone somewhere else. But if it's just responding to things, because so many of us do this on autopilot where we're not even thinking, a
Yes.
notification pops up, we think, "Oh, let me just quickly respond to it," because so many parents, our brains are so full of things, it feels easier to respond in the moment. But I remember reading, I can't remember who this was now, but someone said to me that when she's at work, she tries to keep these things very separate. So when she's at work, as much as she can. She really tries not to plan or worry about the home and kids too much if she can help it. And then when she's with her kids, she really tries to block out work completely. And doing that means that she's better at both things. And that's what I strive for. I don't know that I always achieve that, because if I'm either at work or I'm with my kid, at some point there's going to be a crossover where I need to set up a work thing, or while I'm at work, I might need to organize her birthday or something. It's not always possible to have complete firewalls between the two, but I think it's good advice to aim for. Yeah, and so in terms of what kind of work I would want to do and working for an organization, I do think for the most part that no matter how great the organization is, no matter how flexible, I just think it's impossible, not impossible. Lots of parents obviously do work as staff, but I think it's probably impossible to have as much time with your kids as you may want. And so while she's young, at least, she might turn when she's a teenager, she might not want me to be around a huge amount anyway. But while she's young, I don't really want to be committed to a situation where I can only take time off at certain times and I have to coordinate with other team members, or when I can take leave and all of that stuff. Yeah, I very much love the freelance life.
I love that too. I resonate with that so much. My daughter just turned 10 last weekend, and I have two sons, one who's 4 and one who just turned 7. And the 4-year-old, he is very, and probably because he's so young, and he will get on to me. He's very conscious, very about the phone. He'll say, "Mama, put the phone down." And it's hard. I recently experimented now with, I removed all my social media apps from my phone and I put them on a specific iPad that I use during my work time. And it's helped a lot. And it's also made me conscious at night where I am on autopilot, like my hands have their own mind and they're going to look for TikTok, they're going to look for Instagram, and it's not there. And it's making me notice, right? How, yes, the science of it. That's, I don't know if you've done reporting on that, but just how we know it. We know that these algorithms, these social media platforms, they're designed for that purpose, to keep us engaged as much as possible. That's tied to their revenue, and how hard it is for us to override that system. So interesting.
Such a good idea. I think I might do that. I have a question though.
Yeah.
With an iPad, can you upload to Instagram stories?
With the iPad, yes. Yes, you can.
You can't do that on a computer, right? And that is the only thing that keeps Instagram on my phone. But if I can upload to stories, this could be a game changer for me.
You might. Yeah, I have a drawer right here and I keep the iPad there. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, because now the challenge is I will forget to turn on my iPad sometimes. So I had an intern recently, and she was doing some automated things for me using a scheduler, but it was the type where she would edit it to send a notification to my device for me to push it through, add some commentary, some music, and so on. And then I would not have the iPad on because I was learning the new habit. And she would say, "Why that thing that I prepared didn't post?" And I said, "Oh, because it's supposed to send me a notification, but if I don't turn on the device." So it's so interesting how these social media platforms were created to help us just connect and see classmates and friends and whatnot. And now it's become such a big part of our businesses where, again, how do you keep things in their place?
Yeah, totally. I think this has really given me food for thought, because I have really been struggling with this recently. And yesterday I was talking with my sister about how can we just get off this mindless scrolling, like literally walking from one end of the apartment to the other, as if I'm going to get bored on the way. Why am I doing that? It's insane. But it's, like making a cup of tea or something, like always on it. Okay, I'm going to look into how to move where these social media apps live. I think is a really good idea.
Yeah, we should check in with each other in a month and see how our progress is, to see what we've learned from these experiments. But yeah, I do find that it's interesting because it's one of those things that I think for me, and I know you do, you connect with your community, you connect with students that you coach. through social media. So it's necessary, but then how do we keep it from taking over, from encroaching on our creative space? That's what I keep trying to do with myself. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, where I say, okay, if I'm consuming content, I need to also be creating the same amount. If I do
Yeah,
15 minutes of scrolling, I need to do 15 minutes of creating my own things to share with the world.
that's a good idea
It's
too.
a
I think
battle.
we need to do a masterclass on how to avoid social media. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you have a memoir talking more about parenting, motherland, and I love that title. Can you tell me more about the book, why you named it that, and especially with the treatment of motherland with the parentheses, and what your favorite part is, or chapter maybe from the book?
Okay. Yeah, so Motherland, so it's a memoir about motherhood and but also about race and identity because so my parents, for those who are listening and can't see me, or even if you can see me, you might not know, my parents are from South India, but I've grown up mostly in the UK, but have spent time across both India and England. So I had a very kind of familiar feeling, a familiar story, I think, to other second generation immigrants where I felt sometimes neither one nor the other. So neither
Mm.
English enough to be British, but not Indian enough to be Indian. And so this feeling of being torn a bit between two countries has been part of my identity as long as I can remember. And then when I became a mother, as maybe other parents will identify with, it really makes you look at yourself again and your identity and who you are. It can change who you are dramatically and what you felt was important. And then there was also a moment when my daughter was quite young where she wasn't sure about the color of her skin and she seemed to have confusion about how she felt about herself. So that kind of started a journey of me knowing that I needed to teach her much more about her heritage, but to figure out how to do it in a way, because we live in Europe and we're always going to be living in Europe with no plans to move to Asia. So how do we marry those two heritages in a way? Like Europe is a big part of who she is. We live in Spain now, we were in France before. Yeah, so it really was that journey of understanding who I am and then trying to help her, but without imposing too much of my own sense of myself on her, because as parents it can be quite hard to know where the line is without helping, without literally holding them up at the same time. It's almost like when you're teaching your kid to ride a bike and you're there but you're not holding. You need to let go at some point. In terms of my favorite chapter, I think it's the one where I talk about actually having her, as in giving birth to her, where I ended up having an emergency C-section, but despite that situation, it was still a really beautiful experience. But then when I became a new mum, there was a lot that I had to understand about how I felt now as a new mother and what it meant to be a mother, and a feeling of a connection that I felt with women and mothers across the world and the different situations in which women give birth, which I was very privileged. I gave birth in a beautiful hospital and I had every kind of medicine available to me if I needed it. But as someone who writes about global health and writes often about women and childbirth, I was very conscious of that privilege. And even after I had my baby and I needed support with various things, I think I just felt very lucky that I was fortunate enough to be born in the place that I was born, and not everyone is. So yeah, it's a complicated chapter, but I really like that one.
Wow, that's beautiful. I think so many people will connect to that story no matter where they live in the world, right? Because there's so many folks who are from another place and have gotten to wherever they live for a variety of reasons. And I think it's interesting, maybe being in the United States, people say that we are a country of immigrants and we come from everywhere. And I think a lot of countries now are like that. But it's interesting for me and you, I think because we do physically, we present that we are from maybe somewhere else because you live in Barcelona, I live in the United States, my family, my heritage is Mexican American. So people will question that. And I think because we present physically, I think that issue of being from somewhere else is more pronounced with us.
Yeah.
where I've met people that will tell me in my neighborhood, even that are Irish, that are Scottish, that they can trace their lineage to England, even to
Yeah.
other places. And yet they don't have what you talked about, that sense of otherness, that sense of I'm not from here, I'm not here from here or there. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily, I've never heard it from other folks that also have a heritage from another land. It's not as much like an issue, even though they may have cultural practices and traditions in their family home that they've grew up with. But that physical element of the packaging that we show up in the world with that we don't control, we just open our eyes and we're here in the world trying to figure things out. It's
Yeah.
so interesting. And also because we're looking out. Unless I look in the mirror, I'm not, I'm like, oh, okay, I have brown skin and I have black hair and I have brown eyes and I have certain features. That identity piece is so interesting. And that feeling, like you mentioned, from neither here or there, not enough. I feel that way every day too. I have friends that are from Mexico and they're like, oh, don't say you're Mexican because you're not from there. You weren't born there. Your name is Ashley. You speak
Yeah.
like an American because you are an American. And
Yeah.
then here it's constantly, oh, where are you from? Where are you from? I'm from here. My parents are from here. My grandparents are from here. And I don't have an exotic story, even though that expectation, because of how I present physically, the expectation is that I'm othered, even if I might not feel othered. But that feeling of being othered is almost put on me because of
Absolutely.
those expectations or that interpretation that people have of me. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. I cannot wait. I'm going to read your book because I want to learn more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, it is an interesting thing. And I think talking of the issue of identity is nuanced and complicated and so emotive. And I have spoken, for example, I was at a barbecue yesterday and I was speaking to people there's someone from the Dominican Republic and he's moved to Barcelona recently and he is very proud of his country, but he doesn't feel like he could ever live there. And yet when he's here, and then another woman who's Ukrainian and she lives here and now she's been away for a while. And so there are these complicated feelings in lots of people. But I think it's particularly pronounced when you're a second generation immigrant. So
Mm.
second or third, because so these two people I was speaking to effectively are first generation immigrants. So they have grown up in their homeland and then they've moved. So they may very well have valid feelings of, oh, now I'm really settled in Spain, so I don't feel super connected to my homeland. But they still have a place that they can say is their homeland. Whereas, like,
Mm.
I was born in England, but between the ages of from when I was born to when I was 16, I spent at least half of that time in India, but I wasn't really seen as Indian. But because I've got brown skin and black hair, I wasn't really seen as British even when I was in England. So I do feel not that there's like a hierarchy of more of complexity, and I don't want to say that other people shouldn't feel like had complicated feelings, but I do think that when you're second or third generation immigrant, it is different. It is different to another sense of having just moved to another country. And as you say, when you're moving to a country where you are still in the majority in terms of race, there aren't these judgments that come at you. People don't automatically make, if I were white and living in Barcelona, they might speak to me and then hear a British accent and then they might ask
Sure.
me things, but they wouldn't look at me and immediately assume a whole bunch of things about me, which is what happens when, as you say, when the physical presentation of who we are is unchangeable and it comes with us wherever we go, even when we are not thinking of ourselves. We don't walk around thinking, oh, I'm a brown person walking around. We're just like,
Right.
you know what I mean? We're just a human
Yes.
being wandering around, and then you might walk into a space and immediately feel a shift in tension,
Yes.
which
Yes.
only happens when you are of a minority race. It doesn't happen. Even if someone there are lots of, for example, British people and Irish people in Barcelona. But if a white British person walks into a space, everyone doesn't turn around to look. And so it's those nuances. And it's not that necessarily that happens every time I walk in somewhere, but it can happen. And it's that feeling, I think, if you don't know when it's going to happen or not, sometimes it can make us hyper vigilant to,
Mm.
is this the moment where I am made to feel othered or not? Like you're always, when you've experienced it a few times, you're always a little bit on guard, I think, for those experiences. Yeah.
Wow, you've said so much there that I really connect with. That, and a word that was popping up as you were speaking was rejection almost. And also this idea of, are we being taught? So we're talking about being mothers and raising kids and thinking about how we're going to share our heritage with them and what their heritage is and how their experience is going to be different than ours. And I think I do feel like through those experiences, when you talked about entering a room and noticing the shift, this being noticed and having to constantly explain or even prove or justify, or there's always this explanation, like we need to come with a laminated card. So that way, and just here, read the disclaimer. And I feel like when you're a child, again, like you said, we're not walking around saying, as a brown child, we're walking around as a child. And through that repeated experience, what you're sharing about noticing that shift or having receiving those questions, to me, I do feel that when you talked about being on guard, I definitely feel that. And in my country right now, and especially we're in an election year, and we have our former president who's going to be the front runner for the Republican Party. There's a lot of race, gosh, is such it's always an issue because it's part of the fabric and the history of my country. And I hear a lot of people, oh, well, why are you on guard? Why are you defensive? Why is it always about race? And it's so interesting. I think, unfortunately, for some people, like people who present physically differently, it is always an issue because it's always an issue for us, or it's this
Yeah.
repeated experience constantly.
It is always about race,
It
often.
it is, and people don't want to talk about it. They want to, in my country, they want to sing Kumbaya and we're all the same and just get over it. And you keep talking about race and you guys are making it an issue and it's not. But yet my family, my dad's side, has been in the United States since 1850. Mexico was taken in 1845. So 5 years after this imaginary line.
Yeah.
That's where our new identity came from. And yet constantly, I can't even tell you where in Mexico my family was from because on my mom's side, my great grandfather was an orphan and he came as a child. So that connection is lost, but yet because of the way I present, the constant question is, where are you from? Where are you from? Like, people, I'm from here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in terms of being a science writer, I don't quite know how it is in the States. Certainly in the UK, I was very much and still am in the minority. There are more South Asian writers, there are a few more Black writers, but not many, really not many. And it can make you, when you're always in the minority, it is about race. It is about how you are made to feel. It is about like someone having a question about India and then turning to me and us or wanting my name on a piece or on a project because it's an Indian name.
Yeah.
And so it ticks a diversity quota, even though I don't really feel like someone like me should be ticking that because I haven't lived all my life in India. So I don't represent Indian science writers. So until there is no racism or segregation or violence against brown and Black people, then it always will be about race. In the way that often in spaces where men don't want to talk about feminism or women's rights, it is always about feminism. Of course, because women still not paid the same. We still are completely given such a crappy deal with maternity leave. We still experience like jobs being suddenly disappearing when we go on maternity leave. We still aren't given a huge amount of support in childcare and all of this stuff. Of course, feminism is really relevant. And so the people who are asking those questions usually are not experiencing these issues. And therefore, it isn't an issue to them.
Yeah.
But it is, a complete kind of blind spot of not realizing why it is. And the older I get, to be honest, the more vocal I become about this because I cannot sit in a room where someone tells me that sexism or misogyny or racism just isn't a thing anymore.
Yeah. I think we get to that place, yeah, where we're over it, or we or maybe we, because as full grown women now, maybe it's safer for us too. I think about that a lot, like in my 20s, having those experiences and realizing from social cues of how it was received that it wasn't safe, whether that meant safe for my job, safe for professional connections, for preserving those relationships, that it felt like it wasn't safe to vocalize that truth because of the comfort of people in power, and me needing to survive in a capitalistic society, needing to work, needing reference letters, recommendation, and wanting to be perceived as a team player, as happy, as professional, all of these words as not difficult, not hysterical, even keeled, calm, no matter all the isms that we encounter on a daily basis. So interesting, Priya. So we could write 4 books based on our conversations today.
Yeah.
Oh, so interesting. So you've been in this space for so long, for working as a journalist and also in communications. What trends do you see in the future of science journalism, especially considering this global pandemic that we have that we're recovering, in the process of recovering from?
I feel quite positive, to be honest, about science journalism, science writing. I think there is a real feeling of kind of depression, I don't know, amongst like freelance writers, especially.
Yes.
A lot of sense of, oh, AI is going to take over, or publications aren't paying much anymore, or all of this stuff. And there's a lot of negativity. And I can understand why. The economy is bad, blah, blah, blah. I also think it's worth, though, sometimes those come from emotion rather than necessarily fact.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the state of freelancing or even just being a science writer today, most of us, if we're freelancers, can work from pretty much wherever. We have extraordinary amounts of technology at our hands to subscribe, to transcribe notes, apps that we can use for various things, to make video, audio, like super easily without tons of skill. We can make long distance phone calls or video calls at no cost. I really think like we live in such an extraordinary age to be a freelancer, freelance, any kind of freelancer, but especially a writer, that really, it's not to put down people who are finding it hard, but if you're finding it hard in your particular groove, then figure out something else you can do. If specialist science magazines are folding or they're just not paying you, you didn't become a freelancer just to work in a specialist science magazine. You could do a whole bunch of things as a science writer. You could become a consultant, you could write reports, you could edit reports, you could go and work on people, organizations, write web copy for them, you could research for podcasts, you could write video scripts, you could write for health apps. There's a whole array of things that people can do. It does require you to lift your head up over what you normally do and see what else you can do. But if you're a freelancer, you should be doing that anyway. If you just want to do a particular type of work and stick to doing that, you probably should look for a staff job.
Yes.
Freelancing is not the environment to be in. I don't have any patience also with people who are like, oh, this is so hard. And I think, okay, well, what can you do about it then? There is so much opportunity. There is money out there. In terms of the economy being bad, it's been bad for 20 years. Like, I don't think we should use that as an excuse. Even though the economy is bad, people still sell designer clothes and designer watches,
Yes.
luxury holidays. There is still money out there that people are willing to spend. The trick or the skill that you need to develop is where you find it. And I also do believe that there is still an appetite for really good quality science writing, because during the pandemic, there was so much misinformation put out there, and there was so much that people felt that they couldn't trust. And some of that also, I think we're very quick to judge people for not believing things, but governments lie routinely to their population. Health
Yes.
organizations sometimes lie. or they're very unclear when they don't know something. And that's not lying, but that is being incredibly confusing about messaging and communication. And so if, for example, an organization says you don't need to wear a mask, then a month later you do need to wear a mask. Obviously, people are going to think, which is it? And why have you suddenly flip-flopped? If you're not explaining these things very well, you can't blame people for not believing you. I think there's a lot of anthropologists that I've been speaking to in this area in terms of behavior in health and science, and why do people believe things, and why do they go and get vaccines, what convinces them not to take vaccines. There's a lot of work that as science writers we can do to explain these things better, to be that bridge between scientists and health kind of policymakers and a regular person who does respect science, but is just feeling like there's tons of different messaging coming at them. So I think we have real responsibility and opportunity to be truth tellers in this situation, to support populations, to support people in really understanding. So yeah, when people feel dispirited about the state of science writing, I just think they need to look. They need to look further than where they have always worked and diversify what they can do, because there is a lot of work out there still.
I love that. And I can't think of two subjects when you think about science and journalism. To me, one of the things it represents is truth, facts, objectivity, information, and science. Science is about facts. It's about investigations. It's about experimentation. It's not opinion. And those two things, we need more of it. We need more truth. We need more facts. We need more science. We need more. That's been with the misinformation. With AI coming, a lot of writers have talked about, oh, it's going to take our jobs. And a lot of people feel that way. Graphic designers, music producers, voiceover artists, there's tons, even coders, web developers. It's a tool that can revolutionize all of us in the way that we work. Yeah. But one of those challenges is it's going to, I think, increase the ability to produce misinformation, whether we're talking about deep fake videos, voices, so much. So I think the work that you do and your colleagues with science journalism specifically, I don't know if it's ever been needed as much right now. So I think I don't know about demand, but for me, I feel like that skill set is so important now.
Totally. And I think I do understand why people worry about these things, because there are already so many organizations who are using AI to write a short blog on something or to write a summary of something else. So AI is being used for that. In terms of designers, I know that apps like Canva completely freak them out, because my husband's a graphic designer, and when he sees the things that I produce, not that I'm a great designer on Canva, but it's made so user-friendly.
Yes.
I can make little social media posts and graphics and stuff. But what Canva can't do, it's still me using it. So I don't have the conceptual ability that he has in terms of communicating a concept or an idea. It can only do what I ask it to do. And writing AI, people are always saying, oh, but it's going to evolve. Okay, you can evolve too.
Absolutely.
So like AI writing, yes, it can do certain things, but it can only do what it can do in terms of what someone asks it to do. So if that person is, I don't know, a manager of an organization, the limits to what it can do, because it isn't a science writer, it's not going to craft a beautiful story that has like a really human, let's say, beautiful feature that has like a beautiful human story at the beginning and then goes into, this is all craft and skill. And maybe in 10 years, AI will be able to do that. But I'm very much of the mind that we don't need to borrow trouble. Like, we're not at that stage yet. AI doesn't produce beautiful science features, so why are we worrying about it? And if like you're losing clients because people are using AI to do certain things, then do something else. Like, it really is about understanding that as freelancers, we have the flexibility to learn different skills, to shift sideways into other things. If you're a science writer, then you're a science writer. You don't just have to do one particular kind of thing. I think we all need to be prepared to be a bit uncomfortable, but that way lies great growth as well.
I think so. I think so. I think it's going to make even the idea of learning new things, right? Like we were talking about all of these technological advances that have made it easier for us to do business or be freelancers in general, being on Zoom right now, making those calls, connecting with people literally by just touching a couple buttons using WhatsApp, can use it too. So it's supposed to be a tool that we can leverage now to quickly learn new skills. If we want to
Yeah.
read a manual about something, we could use AI to create summaries and ask it questions and whatnot. And I think to your point with science writers, yeah, the AI cannot create a beautiful scientific story and it cannot make the connections from one topic to the other. It can only its output is only determined by whatever the input is and the prompt that people put in. And it only, I think, was it in November 2021, or I can't remember where it stops in terms of what it's read on the internet. And
Right.
science is about discovery. I think your vertical, especially, it cannot go and interview scientists that are experimenting with something right now in a lab and interview them about that.
Yeah.
And but doesn't know any of that. I think it's
Yeah.
different if we were writing SEO blogs about gardening. That topic may not have any new changes.
Yeah.
But I think what you guys are doing, yeah, I think people need to. I think it's okay to cry, throw a pillow, be mad for a day, and
Yeah.
then the next day evolve, like you
Yeah.
said.
Exactly. And I think also AI still, and I don't believe that this will ever happen. I could be wrong. Maybe we'll check back in 20 years. But you can't have human conversations. The conversation that we just had, where we've skipped from so many topics, and it
Yeah.
has been about our human experience, that is not replicable via AI, no matter how experienced or incredible AI becomes. And it will, obviously, it's learning all the time. There's more inputs, there's more nuance and complexity to what it can produce. It's still not a human brain, and you cannot replicate. Like, if we had this conversation in 6 months' time, it would be a different conversation, or in a week's time. And I think sometimes we forget how incredible the human brain is
Yeah.
and how complicated. And yeah, I don't think we should worry just yet.
I don't either. I don't either. I think what you were talking about, that human experience, that AI doesn't have that. It can't pull from that because it's not a human and hasn't lived like we have. Even I'm looking, Google had their big helpful content update for their algorithm, and there's been subsequent updates. And a lot of folks in our community, depending on if they're writing for certain verticals or they're writing content, have talked about their traffic going down. And I was looking into that and I was seeing that Google was prioritizing search results from Quora and Reddit. And when you think about that, their forums where real human beings are sharing their experiences, their viewpoints, their information, their lived experiences on certain questions in real time. And that's what Google had. It's almost like what you're saying, like Google is seeing this AI and how it's flooding the internet with more content, more ideas. But then it's saying, no, we're prioritizing the real experiences of human beings who are living and breathing. And we're going to play those higher in the algorithm because we know that's what reality is, people. So I think it really, I'm seeing that. I think you're absolutely correct on that. So interesting. So I know that you run courses for other writers. What advice would you give for someone listening to this who's new in their career, who wants to be a freelance science journalist? What would you tell them when they're just starting out?
I would say be quite bold and courageous in the beginning. Like, I think people often shoot quite small when they're starting out and they think, oh, I can only work with these clients or those clients. I do think what I've learned in all these years is that yes, you do need experience, but I do think people should just try things, especially if you're starting out as a freelancer, because now the with the apps and the tools and stuff that we can use, when I was starting out as a freelance writer, I could really only be a writer because to be able to shoot video or produce audio or record a conversation like this would have been such a technical skill that I couldn't have had. Whereas now, I would say if you are a freelance writer, even if you don't necessarily feel confident, try shooting a little video about your story that you've written. Try shooting a little audio, because it is those multimedia skills that publications and organizations really prioritize now. So if you wrote a story and you made a tiny little video about it, or even just an audio, and posted that on your social media, for example, that's so much more an engaging way for someone who may not have time to read the story. And it just is. So yeah, I think I would advise people to just play around with those sorts of things, play around with different ways of telling stories, because as writers, we are primarily storytellers. We don't need to get trapped into thinking that all we should be doing is writing. You never know. You might, maybe that's the first medium that you came to and that felt more natural, but you might love doing video. I have experimented. I would not say by any means I'm great at this, but having now experimented with making video or putting things together, even in something as basic as like an Instagram reel, it forces you to think differently, right? You're thinking visually, you're thinking about how are people going to consume a video as opposed to a 500-piece article, where you have to be a lot punchier and snappier. You have to communicate in a different way. So I would say be playful and just have fun with things.
I love that. The idea of being playful, that definitely feels lighter and less pressure and less like what you were saying, like that the freelance community right now, there is this sense of, I don't know if it's a depression, if it's a angst, if it's a anxiety, but yeah, that idea, that invitation, it's almost an invitation to be playful, an invitation to experiment and to learn. And if we flip that mindset shift and look at this as an opportunity, I think it changes everything. I think about that. You and I are here talking. You're in another continent. We're separated by a massive ocean, and we're speaking because of the power of the internet. And you and I are two brown women in the Western world. We're mothers. In this reality, and we're talking about working for ourselves from our homes or wherever.
Yeah.
This is something that our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, would they ever even imagine this reality? What? Yeah. These opportunities? And I'm reminded of that constantly. I had a conversation with my aunt, my husband's aunt, and she's from Honduras, and she is an immigrant to this country. And I remember I was talking to her and I was saying, Thea, Aunt, what was your dream? What did you want to be when you grew up? And when she laughed at me in terms of, she was like, we didn't get to dream.
Yeah.
We didn't have to dream. We were surviving. We just survived, worked to put food on the table for that day. And that was success. And that was a blessing. And now this idea, like you said, me and you can go on Canva, we can make graphics, we can make videos, we can do interviews, we can have a whole business from our smartphone.
Yeah.
It's opportunity. And I feel like freelancers, listening out there, I hope you just take that and think about that this is opportunity. AI is opportunity. It's not the end of this chapter, you know?
No, absolutely. And I think also, like, remembering that as freelancers, the word free is really important. There are no limits on what we can do. We run our businesses, we are business owners. There is literally no limit to what we can do or what skills we can learn or who we can work with or where we can go. The only limits are ones that we put on ourselves. So if we decide AI is ruining our business, or if we decide there are just no clients out there, those limitations will become reality. So I encourage everyone to just try for a little while, just imagine what you could really do.
That's beautiful. So you've done so many wonderful things, so many beautiful projects, from books to articles, reports, speaking. What are you looking forward to next? Are you working on a new project that people can look forward to reading or experiencing from you soon?
Yes, one of the things I'm really looking forward to launching is an online course for memoir writing. Yeah, and I'm doing a couple of in-person events here in Barcelona. And then a few people on Instagram said to me, oh, I wish it was online because I would love to attend, but obviously they can't fly to Barcelona just for this. And so, yeah, I'm going to launch this soon in the next couple of months or so. And I'm really looking forward to it, because memoir writing, again, like all writing, is storytelling. But this time it's our own story. And I think for a lot of writers, it's an interesting exercise to turn their perspective onto themselves, because we're not used to doing that, especially when we're science writers.
Yeah.
We don't ever put ourselves in the story. We're taught not to do that,
Yes.
to not put our opinions in. And this is all about turning that kind of internal camera onto ourselves and going, who am I? What's my story? What story do I want to tell? So I'm very excited that I'm going to be launching that soon.
I am so excited for you. As you're talking, my hands are sweaty. I'm feeling a little vulnerable just because you're right. That's such a different, we are used to asking questions to people and pulling out and translating and creating this story from this experience or this news or whatever. But pointing it on ourselves and going inward feels exciting, but also, yeah, vulnerable. That's beautiful. I think that's going to be a great offering. And I love that. I know people are going to listen to this and want to connect with you online. Where can people find you online and connect with you to get to know you more?
I'm most active on Instagram, and I'm Priya Joi there, priya.joy, on LinkedIn as well. And I have a Substack called The Art of Freelance, and I love it. People are really engaged. And yeah, so I would love for anyone to come and subscribe. They can subscribe as free or paid, whatever it is. It would be great to have them in the gang. But yeah.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to include those links in the show notes so folks who are listening can definitely check you out and follow you there. Thank you so much, Priya Joy. It has been a joy to share space with you today, to get to know you more, and to really hear your insights from your amazing career in the freelance journalism and communication space.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.